Oh, beautiful. Well, welcome. Happy Wednesday. It is midweek. I cannot think of a better way to spend our midweek, spend this hour. Um, we have a guest speaker today. I am really looking forward to hearing the story. I'm really looking forward to being inspired, to being moved today. So thank you all for joining us. You have joined Can Do webinar on Wednesday. We will be here every Wednesday till the end of the year. So lots of opportunity to um, take in that knowledge to build capacity. That's really what this is all about, for us to grow, to learn, to imagine, what's the best, what's good for our nations, for our organizations, for our families, where we live. So welcome, welcome. My name is Michelle. I am joining from Amiskwaciwa-Skagit, Edmonton Treaty 6 territory. Very humbled, very grateful to be able to, dream, to set up my own small business, to work, to play on Treaty 6 territory. I come from Treaty 4 territory, so I acknowledge that I'm a guest to this land. So I think it's important to acknowledge the land in which you're living on, the land in which you're able to do your business. You're able to follow that passion. You're able to, stir whatever creator has given to you in your heart. So acknowledge the land in which we live on. And May 5th was just last week, and to take just a moment to acknowledge, this crisis of our Indigenous missing and murdered women, girls, to spirit. I think that that's really important to acknowledge. We still have this trauma, this systemic issues within our people. And what a way to bring in an Indigenous woman today to share her story, to share her strength, to share what she brings to the table. And I am so honored to introduce her in a moment. We're going to just take a moment. I always like to press pause. Maybe plant both of your feet on the ground, sit up tall. If you're like me, I go around the day with bad posture. So sit up tall, take a deep breath in through the nose and exhale out through the mouth, and just acknowledge the gift of life, the gift of this moment, the gift that Creator had given to us when that sun rose in the east, that we have this opportunity to live our lives in a good way. The Cree word, the Miopamatsuin, the good life. So this right now, this moment, is for us to be able to take in this good knowledge that is going to be shared with us. And so we give thanks for this moment. We give thanks to Creator for all of the good gifts that are all around us, even on those hard days where we feel like there's no goodness to be seen anywhere. There's a lot of tragedy. We think of the wildfires. There's some tragedy in our city last week with the tragic death of a mom and her daughter. So there's lots of tragedy. And so sometimes we have to really dig deep and really look to that goodness and that beauty around us. So we acknowledge that today, that Creator is good. And when we walk in Creator's world, there is that goodness. There is that hope all around us. There is that light. So we give thanks. Okay, so today's webinar does look a little bit different. I've got some questions for our guest speaker. I think she's phenomenal. Some of the words to be used in explaining and expressing her would be entrepreneur. She innovator. She is a strategic advisor, a mentor, an educator, a powerhouse. And so it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Shannon Pestun. I thank you so much for being here. She's joining us from Treaty 7 territory, the Métis Nation of number 3. I think I said that horribly wrong.
You know what? You said it just as it was meant to come out, but it came out as it did. And yes, I'm calling in from Treaty 7, also home of the Métis Nation Region 3. So thank you for acknowledging.
So welcome, welcome. I'm honored that you're here. And I actually did a little Google search. So if you ever, want to read more about her, and I guarantee that you will want to read more about her after today. I did a Google search, and she is one of the women in 2022. She's one of the women of influence, and I think that speaks volumes right there. So we're honored to have you join us this afternoon. So she's an entrepreneur, courageous leader who is breaking barriers to advance an inclusive and sustainable economy. So recognized for creating innovative funding models and solutions that challenge the status quo, Shannon is one of Canada's most sought after finance consultants and a trusted voice on women's entrepreneurship for educators, government, industry, and the media. As I said earlier, powerhouse. She was one of the first women in the country to lead a women's banking strategy, and one of seven women appointed to serve on Canada's Women Entrepreneurship Experts Panel. She's the co-founder of the Finance Cafe, the CEO of Pestun Consulting, and the senior advisor for business and finance for Canada's Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. She is committed to bolstering Indigenous economic prosperity and wellness by driving regional economic growth and bringing an Indigenous-centered approach to her work, which is so important. So in 2020, she created a bursary for Indigenous women entrepreneurs, the first community-funded bursary that supports Indigenous women who pursue entrepreneurship, and has raised over, drumroll please, $120,000. How remarkable is that? So we're just getting started. So before we just dive into the essence of who you are and what you're bringing to the table as an entrepreneur, I want to know, what is one word or words, let's not limit you here, that would best describe you?
Well, if you were to ask my mom, she would probably say rebellious. So I'm going to go with rebellious.
Oh my, okay, I love that. Okay, what's your favorite song?
Oh, right now. Okay, so right now on my playlist is Maps. I don't know. It's a long story, but it's a great song. It's a great song.
Okay, love it. And if you came with a warning label, what would that be?
Ooh, I'd probably say something like, what's the worst that can happen? Just stand back.
Okay, love that. Love that. Okay, so my first question for you is, you were one of the first women in Canada to lead a women's banking initiative, and were appointed to Canada's first women's entrepreneur strategy. Can you tell us about that?
Well, let me tell you what's kind of funny about that, because I've often called myself like the accidental banker and the accidental entrepreneur. Because really, when I was growing up, I was told I was terrible with numbers. So the fact that I have a small finance company today, the fact that I'm disrupting the finance sector is kind of probably surprising to my younger self and to the teachers that I had around me. But yeah, you know what it comes down to is I was working in banking, and I was a business banker, and I remember having one lady in my portfolio and one woman that I was working with. And I just remember having this thought that, oh my gosh, this is the only woman entrepreneur that I have in our portfolio here. And so I don't know, maybe just a sense of curiosity. I don't think I ever intended that I was going to be starting to go into like feminist financing and looking at the system from a feminist perspective. I just really curious. And then you start to, peel back the layers, and you think there's a lot of socially, social problems within the banking system. There's structural barriers, there's socialization barriers, there's structural barriers. And so I just really started to kind of unravel it. And before I knew it, it's like the old adage, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And it was kind of like that for me. I just kept pulling it back and I was like, no, something's broken with this system. And I just started to question the system. It was kind of hard because I was working inside the bank as I was doing this. So challenging the very system that writes your paycheck is never comfortable. But I was really fortunate in the sense that I was able to approach a man whose name is Ed Straw, and he was really pivotal in my career and in the work that I do today, because he really gave me a chance to say, build out a strategy. Let's see what this can look like. And a few years later, we had a women's banking strategy at the financial institution that I was working for.
Awesome. So I have a question about your earrings. Did you make them?
I did not make them. I only wish I could make jewelry like this. These earrings are made by Melreen Eagle Savoy, Native Diva Creations. She is absolutely incredible. And I think I might have messed up her name. Sorry, Melreen, if I mixed up your full name there, but Native Diva Creations. And, thank you for calling that out too, because I also think it's so important to support Indigenous women entrepreneurs, and purchasing our products is certainly one of the ways that we can do that. So thanks for asking.
Of course, they're fabulous. You look fabulous. Okay, so you've been a strong advocate for breaking down barriers in the finance sector. What has this journey been like for you personally?
That's such a great question, because a lot of this journey for me has been very heart-centered work. And I kind of said earlier that I was this accidental banker that turned accidental entrepreneur. And, I just believe that we are all gifted by the Creator, and Creator has given us very specific roles for community, and using our own gifts and our talents. And a lot of this work has been a journey for myself, even of truth and reconciliation, looking at what does it mean to have an inclusive innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I guess being an Indigenous woman and having that perspective and talking with Indigenous entrepreneurs from coast to coast to coast, like I learn so much every day. And, Indigenous peoples, we're not a homogenous group, right? There's so much diversity just within us. And so the journey for me is just one of continuous learning, and I would say unlearning as well. And, part of that being curious about how do we decolonize entrepreneurship? How do we decolonize the financial sector? Those are questions that they're not easy answers, and they're very complex because we're dealing with a lot of systems work where a lot of those barriers are upheld. And so for me, the journey has really been about what's working, what isn't working, where can we move the system to? Again, systems are big things to try and change. So it's like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? It's kind of just trying to find out where each bite is going to come from. But I would say that it's really passion and conviction, because the more that I speak with Indigenous women entrepreneurs, the more I see how entrepreneurship is paving a way towards economic self-sufficiency for a lot of women. You mentioned last week being May 5th and Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Two-Spirited Peoples Day. And I was in Saskatoon actually for that day. And we were so blessed because we were in circle, but we benefited from being in ceremony through another conference that we just kind of got to watch from the peripheral. And there were so many elders there. And of course, we think about we think about the calls to justice, and we think about what is our individual work in this and how do we each contribute. I was so moved, and just the drumming, the pain that we can feel, the hurt that is still there. But on the other side of this is empowerment and courageous conversations and courageous change. So for me, I've seen so many Indigenous women entrepreneurs who, and I'll talk a little bit later about this, but see entrepreneurship as medicine. And it was Bobby Reset of Virtual Gurus that said that to me one day. And I've never forgotten her story and why it was medicine. And so I think, how can we use entrepreneurship to help us heal, to not only to strengthen our own lives, but the lives of our families, and to strengthen and enrich in community. At the same time, also reclaiming our power and place as Indigenous women in all facets, whether it's social or economic, or in ceremony. There's just this whole reclamation that we're seeing. And I think that that's really powerful, and that is where a lot of my advocacy comes from is the stories of other women, and amplifying and using my voice to amplify where I can.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I find that wherever I go, whichever direction I look to, I see, our people rising and stepping into, who they are, to their ideas and what we know to be true as Indigenous peoples. And it's be beautiful. I love also that you captured that curiosity, like going into that. We don't know it all, that we're here also to learn and to grow with each other. So bringing in that curiosity, that also attitude of being a student. Hey, I'm here to learn just as much as you are, but I'm also here to lend my wisdom wherever I can, and which is, I think, is what you are doing so profoundly. So you're a proud Cree Métis woman who is working to close important gaps for Indigenous women. So when did you begin to focus on Indigenous women's entrepreneurship?
Well, I guess my journey on that really starts when I was at ATB working on the women's entrepreneurship banking strategy. And Holly Cooper led our Indigenous strategy. And Holly became a mentor to me, and like true to Indigenous communities, became a sister, and we just really got together in community. And she really stretched my thinking as I was building out the strategy to remind me of the importance of taking that intersectional lens, and not just an intersectional lens, but truly an Indigenous focused lens on how we were going to be able to move more women entrepreneurs into entrepreneurship and help more Indigenous women start and grow their businesses. And again, it's the more, I think we're in such a time of learning, and I was just very open to hearing everything that I could from Holly. I acted like a sponge to her, and who knows better than what we need than our Indigenous communities. And so I really took to heart a lot of the wisdom and the knowledge that she shared with me. So for me, that was probably the starting place of it. When I left my banking job to start my entrepreneurship work, there was a couple of, I guess, pivotal moments for me. One, I'm really fortunate that I sit as a board member at Mount Royal University, and really looking at the indigenization strategy as a real priority for post-secondary learning. But also, how does entrepreneurship and how does training support the future pipeline of Indigenous women entrepreneurs? And so I started to get more committed into thinking about, not only can we just support women once they're entrepreneurs, but how do we start the conversation earlier? And in fact, it needs to be much earlier than post-secondary, but this was a way that I knew that I could make some impact. And finally, I do work with the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub alongside Ashley Richard and Kara Thorvaldson, who lead a lot of the work that we're doing around research for Indigenous women entrepreneurs in Canada. And so again, it's being in community and being able to see what everybody else is doing, and this ecosystem that is truly building around us. That's probably been the biggest change that I've seen over the past few years, is that more people are talking about Indigenous entrepreneurship and Indigenous women's entrepreneurship. And so my interest continues to grow, because the ecosystem around me and the people that are rising to do different things, we just keep showing up in greater numbers. And so my passion continues to, the spark was definitely Holly Cooper and those conversations. But then also in my work, I also started to really look at my own culture and how much I didn't know about who I am, and overcoming some of the, maybe even the biases that I had, and the stories that had been passed on to us, because being Métis was not something that our family talked about very much. And I know that that's common in our Métis communities, but it was really hard for me to reconcile trying to trying to advance Indigenous entrepreneurship without really being able to reconnect and start to know who I am and where I come from. So it's just, everything has been a journey. It is just one sort of footstep in front of the other. And there are days that I question, and I've said before in other forums, like I question, am I Indigenous enough? I don't, there's so much that I don't know, and so much that I feel that I have yet to learn. And so like, that's still something that I'm, I guess, I don't want to say struggling with. It's something that is coming alive in me again. And so that's pretty exciting. So that drives also a lot of the work that I'm doing.
Oh, beautiful. I think we all can relate to that in one sense or another, not being enough or that imposter syndrome. So thank you for sharing that because we all, no matter where we are on the journey, we have those moments. And again, we need to bring it back to that journey. To one step at a time, really understanding who you are. I think that that's really important. So you already talked about, leaving the company that you had worked with, and so that was during the pandemic. That was such a long time ago. It feels like such a long time ago. But
Well,
then
it
from
does, but
out
just
of
last
that,
week I took another COVID test because I was like, I'm not feeling great. It turned out to be allergies, but I mean, are we through COVID? Are we still with it? I just
right, right. So out of that, though, you started your own business. So one of them is your consulting, and then the next one is the finance cafe. So what made you take what called you, made you, what was that leap like for you? And then what are you up to right now?
Thank you. So I guess the leap for me was when COVID first hit. I still remember exactly the day that I was thinking I should steal the toilet paper from the restaurant that I was in because I was hearing about this toilet paper thing, people wanting to get all the toilet paper that they could. And I still remember where I was when I heard about COVID. But again, working within the ecosystem, and I was still part of the women's entrepreneurship panel for Canada. And we knew immediately that women entrepreneurs were going to be harder hit. And we also knew that when we layered on intersectionality, those barriers were going to get even greater. And I was at a time where I knew that the impact that I was going to be able to make inside the system was probably going to be less than what I could make if I branched on my own. And out of a leap of faith, I reached out to Wendy Suk here at the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, and was really fortunate that I was able to get a contract to launch my entrepreneurial career. And that really led us to the research and doing a lot of advocacy work, because for a lot of women entrepreneurs, a lot of the relief programs that came out didn't suit their businesses. And we saw the same thing happen within our Indigenous communities as well. And so for me, starting Pestun Consulting was really, I guess, a combination of my work that was working with government, that was working with industry and civil society and the ecosystem to say, how can I lend what I know to help advance the work that you're doing? And it started a consulting company that, I mean, 2 years or like 3 years ago, I never would have thought that I would actually do. The other thing, though, that we did is I connected with a girlfriend of mine to create the Finance Cafe. And the Finance Cafe is the first true gender focused financial literacy program for women entrepreneurs. And I've had the advantage, I guess, of sitting on the front lines and listening to women who have always, said, I don't feel as confident as I want to in the numbers, and I don't trust the decisions that I'm making. And I don't always understand like how my company is going to make money so that I can turn around and make the impact that I want. And I do believe that finance and financial literacy is still a huge barrier. And I'll even go one step further to say we can again look at systems, and we can take a look at how a lot of our Indigenous communities were not part of economic systems. They weren't part of financial education. And so the system also really created the system of dependency. And now I would say the tides are changing, but we really do need to focus on helping people normalize the conversation with money, looking at our feelings about money, because all of that is going to influence entrepreneurship. So the Finance Cafe, that's what we're doing there. And so I'm continuing on both journeys. And just yesterday, somebody said to me, Shannon, what's your plan for the next few years? And I said, I just don't know, because I feel like I need to be open, because creator's definitely speaking to me right now. And I just need to trust the steps that are being put in front of me. And so what's next? Who the heck knows? I don't have I wish I knew, but I'm just going to keep putting one step in front of the other, and trusting that the work that I'm doing is meaningful and sustainable, and that it will continue to allow me to exist as an entrepreneur.
Beautiful. So I want to bring it back to that quote that you talked about earlier, or you mentioned. You're going to talk about it now, but I love it. Entrepreneurship is medicine. How so?
Well, I guess we take a look at, entrepreneurship as medicine. And I know Bobby would have her own take on this, but let me just kind of take it for how it touched my own spirit. But myself, I was somebody who dropped out of high school. When you read my bio, sometimes I kind of laugh because I'm like, who is that person? Because in my mind, sometimes I'm still Shannon at 16 years old, but I was someone that overcame my own trauma. I left home really early. I was forced to drop out of high school so that I could maintain a roof over my head, being a young woman. And entrepreneurship for me, like I kind of jokingly said that I'm a bit rebellious, but I am a bit of a rebel. I do see the world a little bit differently. And sometimes it's really hard to fit into a corporate environment when you have that type of disruptive personality. I always try and disrupt for good, but change is really hard, and it's very hard to do within big organizations. And so for me, entrepreneurship has really been, I wouldn't have been able to connect to my roots and who I am had it not been for this journey. I would not be able to think about ways that I can improve our situation for the next 7 generations. I wouldn't be able to be on platforms like this where I can talk about the importance of this work and why it's so imperative. And also it's for other women, like I mentioned earlier, it is a pathway to economic self-sufficiency. And a lot of the work that I do with entrepreneurs, a lot of it comes back to self-worth, how I feel about myself and the worth and the value that I bring. And so I watch entrepreneurs from sort of their starting place and growing, Melreen being one of them. I met her several years ago, and she has grown leaps and bounds since then. She's been on the New York Fashion Week, Santa Fe Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Runway. Like she's been absolutely incredible. Or Jen Harper, who's redefining what beauty is to our Indigenous peoples and representing Indigenous peoples in a beauty industry where we have never been a part of. And so I see so much healing coming out of entrepreneurship, because a lot of entrepreneurship is about social issues. Right? It's that everything is relational, and we have to think beyond profits, and we have to think about what we're leaving behind, and we have to think about how we all fit interconnectedly into this world. Like this world is still a gift. And so I for entrepreneurship and healing, I guess that's how it has kind of hit my spirit, and the energy that comes through me by thinking about it that way. And so if I can empower more Indigenous women to see themselves as entrepreneurs, or taking their ideas and watching it come to life, like that is such a gift to me to be able to watch.
I thought of the quote from Chief Seattle, and he says this, that we're just a mere strands of this web of life. So that it captures what you just said, that we're all interconnected, but we all individually are important strands as well. And you had talked about how you see the world differently, and so then that you operate out of that. You get your voice in those areas that a voice such as yours a perspective such as yours wouldn't have been heard. And so we honor that. We honor you for the courage that it takes to get your perspective, your voice, your lens out there. So thank you. So you talk about wanting to help Indigenous economic prosperity. Tell me more.
I guess it kind of extends just to the last conversation that I was having, right? Our communities prosper, our families prosper. We as individuals can prosper because we're able to bring our gifts and our talents and our unique lens to the world. And the world needs that diversity more than ever. But I would say that what's equally important about this is not just prosperity, but sovereignty. And also being able to look at how we're reclaiming our culture. And when I think about specifically Indigenous entrepreneurship, I mean, there's the values that come from Indigenous entrepreneurship are so vital to what our future needs. And I feel like the world is opening up to our ways of doing and our ways of being, which does excite me. And around reclaiming culture, we know the importance of our culture. We know the importance of language and its connection to culture and its connection to our own healing. And I think about the entrepreneurs who are bringing that traditional knowledge into their companies, using Indigenous language in their packaging and in their product names and telling their stories. And so for me, when I think about driving that economic prosperity, it's also about prospering as different nations, as different cultures, but bringing the best of two worldviews.
Love it. So I'm very curious, in what ways is Indigenous entrepreneurship different?
Yeah, it's a question I guess I don't struggle with, but where do you start? Because it's different in so many ways. And I think about, the definition of capitalism and everything being about profit. And it's not like entrepreneurship has always existed within Indigenous communities, as has innovation. We have always been innovators. We didn't always call it entrepreneurship. But again, I'll go back to the concept of everything is relational. Our connection to one another, to caring for the land, animals, and reflecting on just how every decision we make today is going to have an impact on the next 7 generations. So that 7 generational thinking is incredibly, I would say, different. Maybe the Western world calls it sustainability in their terms, but I guess that's kind of the way that I would view it as an Indigenous entrepreneur. But I also think it's this conflict of individualism versus collectivism. And when I think about entrepreneurship, and I mean, if you Google the richest entrepreneurs in the world, we know exactly what that profile is going to look like. It's going to look very much like a Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, or a Steve Jobs, or Elon Musk. It's like profits. We have sacrificed a lot of things in the name of profit. And when I think about profit, it's the impact that profit can make. Profit itself is not bad in companies. We need profitable companies so that we can make more of an impact. But it's, what is that impact going to look like? And again, sometimes I will have conversations with entrepreneurs who, and as far as I know, this is, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't been able to come across an Indigenous word for retirement. And so when I think about how is Indigenous entrepreneurship different, say, from non-Indigenous entrepreneurship, again, it's that community, it's that focus of taking care of one another, and we know our roles, and we come together in community. So wealth is not an individual experience or possession. It's meant to be shared. So I would say that that's a big piece of it. Also, and I guess maybe it ties into how we redefine wealth, or how we look at wealth, how it's defined, who holds the power, and then ultimately how that wealth is distributed. And again, I would just go back to that social impact piece that is so critical, and that most Western organizations are trying to wrap their minds around. How do we do this? And so I think that's many of the ways in which we're different. But I'd love to see in the chat, from people on the line too, like how you see Indigenous entrepreneurship versus what we'll call as Western entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I would love to see some of those thoughts out there as well. Just so y'all know, there will be time, at the end for, discussion, questions, further conversation. So yeah, put in the chat box what she had just asked. Like, you have really captured, the essence of who we are as a people, our values. And part of that story also is the trauma. And so there is a need for trauma-informed processes. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, like another really big question, but I think when we're looking at trauma-informed approaches, it's when I look at it from a financing perspective, just as an example, it's, what are the systems that are upholding the way that we're continuing to hurt people or exclude people from the process? Understanding the past history, how colonization has kept Indigenous people out of the economic systems. Looking still at how racism and discrimination impact decisions around financing, for example, and how many Indigenous peoples, for us starting our businesses, access to financial capital is still the number one barrier that we face. But in my work working with women entrepreneurs, I'm very careful to address trauma. I like to invite an elder into the room, even for our sharing circles, because I feel that there's a lot of healing and a lot of hurt that also I'm not equipped to deal with. I don't have the same knowledge that an elder obviously would bring to the conversation, but also someone who can impart that wisdom and also give us sort of the freedom to explore that trauma in a really safe place. But, again, when we think about domestic violence or that more Indigenous women live in poverty, it's often harder for them to start companies. And so understanding that lived experience, understanding where the trauma triggers are in our systems and in our processes, and the way that we move them forward in a good way, that to me is how I look at trauma-informed approaches to women's entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm. So there has been many Indigenous women who've experienced sexual violence. And so what way has this impacted the work that you've done from your own lived experience to your own resilience?
I think for me, it gives me empathy. It gives me a place of understanding, because I know what part of my life that took for me, and certainly I am not alone in this picture. But I also feel that, for me, it's also part of that commitment to bolstering women's participation in our economy and being able to help them transform from feeling maybe that they can't do something into something that they can. I mean, I was a textbook case myself as somebody, again, like I left school really early. I was very depressed. I lived for years with very deep and dark thoughts that went through my head about, why I was here, not wanting to be here, and not really sure what value I just never felt good. I just didn't know my own value. And I can see that in somebody else. And I feel that there's a part of me that has been called to this work, because a lot of women that I work with have had a similar experience. So I would say that it's empathy, and it's also being able to use my voice again. I'm in a different place in my career now. I'm in a different place of my own growth. And while sometimes I doubt the tables that I get to sit at and my involvement at them, I know that I have been given a voice to use, and to also use that voice as a safe place for collectively other women to share their stories. And so that I can also bring those stories to the forefront.
I honor your vulnerability and your honesty, and the story that we all have our own story. We all have that own pain, but some of us, we keep it. And for you to be able to, briefly touch on it and share it, thank you for that. So through your own work, what have you learned about other Indigenous women?
Well, first of all, we're warriors. Like, women are incredibly strong. And it's, again, going back to that reclamation, and reclaiming our power in place. And there is such a beauty to watching women reclaim that space. And so for me, what I'm seeing is just this untapped potential. And it's like, how do we harness what is sitting here? And I even look at Indigenous entrepreneurship, like with women. Indigenous women are starting businesses at twice the rate of Canadian women generally. Like, we want a seat at that table. We want to be able to explore what that means for us. But at the same time, we're still locked out of many opportunities. And so again, education, getting into the workforce, being equipped with the tools and the support and the resources that we need to be able to succeed. It's not it's not an issue of us not being there. It's that the resources, on the other hand, haven't met the demand of what we're seeing in the entrepreneurial ecospace. But I also think that we need to spend more time elevating and talking about and finding our Indigenous role models. I still think that we are absent in pictures of entrepreneurship, in stories about entrepreneurship, in media stories, and anywhere you can look at film, we're still really underrepresented. So I think it's incredibly important that we continue to lift one another. We continue to celebrate successes. And I would also say in that too, that on the other side, what I have seen in some communities is that lateral violence still exists. And, there's tension, particularly for some women who are on reserve, who want to start their own businesses, who are still to this day being outcasted And like, that's a very tricky place to be, right? Because you're losing community, which means losing identity, which means a whole bunch of other harmful things that continue to resurface. So, I guess for me, that the need for role models and being able to celebrate each other's success and raising Indigenous women, supporting them as consumers, helping them get into procurement streams, all these things are really, really, really important about what I'm learning through my work, and what still needs to happen.
Mm. Whenever I see Indigenous women rise, I give myself permission to rise as well. So we love to
Love
see
that.
when each other rise.
Love
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about role models from previous generations. Who are some of the entrepreneurs you look up to?
Well, she probably wouldn't call herself an entrepreneur, but if I look at my grandmother, who is no longer in this world with us, she's in the spirit world. But when I look at my grandmother, they were farmers. They were, looking after our community. My grandfather drove the school bus and to try to get the kids to school. And, my grandmother turned cream into butter. And, she was very, very entrepreneurial. And I would say a lot of that came from there. And also my own family, the entrepreneurial spirit really kicked in there. And some of my I guess my role models, as much as I had a really tumultuous time in my youth, my mom still too is very much a role model. And I see so much of where I come from when I look at my mom and try it and look at her differently. Like, yes, she's my mom, but it's seeing her as a human being as well is just kind of cool. But there's too many entrepreneurs to name, and too many people that have helped me in my career to single-handedly be grateful for. But I have like you, the same thought that when we see other Indigenous women rise, like, I aspire to be like them. I aspire to push myself to a higher level, to a higher standard, and push myself out of my comfort zone. What does Brene Brown say? You can choose courage or comfort, but not both. And so I think the role models that are really front and center in my world are those women that have a bit of that rebellious spirit of going against the grain and working to do things differently.
Beautiful. I'm writing some notes down here. This is so inspirational. So in this beautiful journey that you've walked up to this point in your life, what have you learned about yourself?
Well, that I'm still learning, that there's multiple versions of the growth and evolution of Shannon Pestun. But I'm also learning to honor every part of myself. I used to live in this world of professionalism. What's the word I'm looking for? I had to be a perfectionist. And I think it goes back to, when I left home so early, failure wasn't an option for me because I knew where that was going to take me. And so at that point, being so young, I think I learned that the only person I could really depend on at that time, rightfully or wrongfully, was myself. And so for me, I'm learning to honor who that little girl was and how that girl is still very much the girl that I carry with me today. So I've learned that that I am resilient. I've learned that I have a good heart, despite what the narratives that I told myself when I was younger. I've learned that I have worth, despite what I told myself when I was younger. But I've also learned not to put limits on myself or what I think I can and cannot do, because again, looking back 30 years when I was, 16 years old, I never would have thought that I could turn into this person that I am today.
And we're so glad you did.
Me too.
So what are you most proud of? And do you have any regrets?
Ooh, okay, bold. Well, yes. Okay. Let's start with the regrets, because I think that those are easier to name. I would say that I don't know if regret is the right word, but I wish I knew now what I knew now, or I wish I know now. I wish I knew then what I know now about the beauty of being Indigenous. And I wish I would have spent more time with my cocoon. I wish I would have had time with her to hear more of her stories. And I wish that we had been in a time where we could have asked those questions too, because it's not that it wasn't encouraged. We just didn't talk about a lot of things. And there's so many stories that I want to know. There's so many things that are kind of, I see in our family that they're very nuanced, but I know that that's coming from an Indigenous perspective or an Indigenous worldview. And so I guess my regret is not having that time. And I think we all have to pause and think about time, because we all have, a date that we will no longer be in this physical world, and just the gift of learning. And I think especially for me, someone who's really going on this journey of truth and reconciliation, and what that means for me personally, to not have some of the stories is a big gap. So I wish, it's not a regret. I wish I could have known then what I know today. But tomorrow I'll probably say, I wish I would have known today or yesterday what I know today. So who knows? And I guess what I'm most proud of, what I'm most proud of is this bursary that was created, and I created it at Mount Royal. And I had this vision that I wanted to create a gifting circle. And again, for me, gifting circle goes back to being a kid. And when I didn't really feel like I had a lot of options myself, there was one woman who really took me under her wing, helped me get back into school, and she gifted me a new life is the best way that I can say that. And when I think about a gifting circle, it is that we are all part of this circle. We are all in the same sphere, and no one should be outside of it. And when I think about my role today and walking along this journey of my own learning and unlearning, I have this opportunity to help invite other people to walk along with me. And this bursary is now raised like 120,000 for future Indigenous students. And most recently, just in the past couple of weeks, I haven't actually launched it yet. You're going to be the first to know in this group, but I've launched another gifting circle bursary for Indigenous women entrepreneurs through Inspire. And I also haven't said my big number out loud, but I'm really hoping to see that number turn into $1 million through corporate donors and private donors. And it doesn't matter if you have $20 to give or $20,000 to give. I just, in my view, I'm thinking if we could do $120,000 at one post-secondary institution, what could we do if we brought this across Turtle Island? And so you're going to see some messaging if you follow me on LinkedIn. I'll certainly share more about that. But it's this time of giving back and gifting back. And I've had that gift given to me, and now it's my time to gift forward. So, but I don't want to do it alone. It's not called the Shannon Pestun bursary, and it's very intentional that it was the gifting circle bursary. And I think it's also a way of decolonizing the way that we look at sponsorships and bursaries, because no one has a name. It doesn't matter if you're a big donor or a little donor, we're all in this circle together. Some of us have more to give than others. And I just want to invite that space. So I'd say that that's really what I'm most proud of, because I never believed that it would grow to this. And I think, my goodness, what could happen if we were able to talk about this and see this grow to $1 million. So yeah, talk to me in a few years from now, and and I'll catch you up to speed on where that's at. But yeah, I would say that that's it.
That's awesome. I mean, that's powerful. That's possible. We're rooting for you. We'll stand with you. We'll make contributions where we can. I think that's beautiful, and thank you. So just a couple last questions. What is your hope for Indigenous women's entrepreneurship going forward?
Well, my big hope is that one day we don't have to say Indigenous women's entrepreneurship. I know that there are some people that will often say, why do you use women entrepreneurs, and why do you have to focus on Indigenous women entrepreneurs? And the day that all systems are equal and we're not seeing these gaps is the day that I will feel comfortable dropping the word Indigenous woman entrepreneur. But we are far from that. And it's really important that we do put a spotlight on these gaps, because we're not going to see the change if we don't. So my hope is that one day we don't have this desegregation, right? That Indigenous women entrepreneurs have the same opportunities that non-Indigenous women have. And ultimately, again, that our whole selves feel like we're in a better way. We're able to move our families forward, our communities forward. And ultimately, I believe the world forward, because when I think about, our Indigenous values, there's so much power, there's so much to learn there. And I like to often gift people books so that they can read, whether it's decolonizing trauma or decolonizing education, just so that they can see the realities that we're up against. And so, yeah, I guess that's my hope, is that one day that we don't have the inequities that we have today, and that we allow everyone the chance to be their full selves and live a life well lived, however that looks, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. And so you just imparted so much goodness, wisdom, knowledge, your story, which is really a story of strength and rising into who you are created to be. Where could we find you if we want to follow your journey?
Thank you. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm at Shannon Pestun on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram as well. And I certainly invite, if you wanted to send me a note there and just exchange emails, that's an easy way to do it. And yeah, that's where you can find me. But I also just really want to thank you as well, Michelle, for leading me in this conversation. I was saying to Michelle earlier that, I can speak all day long about women's entrepreneurship and the work, because it's not, and oftentimes I don't bring in the personal side of me, but when I have to speak about the personal side of me and get vulnerable, I get stuck in that imposter syndrome. And it's really hard for me to pull out the best part of my story. So thank you for so thoughtfully thinking about the questions and guiding me through this conversation, because it's always a bit of a struggle to get this out.
Well, it was an honor, sister. Thank you so much for being here and lending us your valuable time. I saw that there was one question in the chat box. What advice do you have to obtain capital or seed funds for startups?
Okay, great question. And I would say that if you haven't looked at NACA's Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Program, so there are, I think, 59 different Aboriginal financial institutions across the country. And NACA recently launched an Indigenous Women's program that offers microloans for women entrepreneurs to start and grow their businesses. As well, there's Community Futures in some of our regions, has some support. There's also local women's enterprise centers. But I would start when we're thinking about capital and seed funds for startups is more on the investor side of things versus the debt side. So that's more traditional lending or financing through lending. But if you're looking more at seed capital for startups, there's some really great groups. I know that there's the 51 across Canada, and the 51 is a venture capital group. I think that, Raven Capital is another one. I think Bobby Reset and Jen Harper were both somewhat supported through them through some venture capital. So they might have some good pathways into finding some of that seed money as well. I hope I answered that question.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was a great question. Okay, so we have but 4 minutes left. Does anyone have a question or comment? We'd love to hear you. Devin, she said, thank you so much for your presentation. She's got to get going. Thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great day, Devin. It was nice to see her on the line. I know Devin, so great to see your name, Devin.
Awesome. Punita said, incredible work supporting women of the world by your webinar. All right, so Natalie, I see your camera is on. We see you. Come on in.
Hi, everybody. I'm in Toronto right now, but I'm actually from Saskatchewan. So I'm actually in Toronto with a partnership with the University of Toronto and the Toronto Metropolitan University to develop a building material that is fireproof, mold-proof, mold resistant. We're dealing with a building material that will transition into our communities that already has building code built into it without having to have building code in our communities. So looking at the larger startup at this, I have incubation funding with CMHC's Northern Supply Chain Challenge with Northern Supply Chain Solutions for Housing. So I'm really looking towards the bigger picture as a woman in building materials. How do I connect all these dots? I have $200,000 that I've been working with to start, but now, you know, it's started. There's no stepping back. There's no, speaking from what you were saying, from being able to actively and participate from the heart, building material is from the heart. So you had mentioned Raven and 51. Those would probably be two good examples of a place that I could probably start connecting for further supports.
For further private capital, you can certainly start with Raven. I mean, they are Indigenous focused, which and looking at social impact as well. And so you can certainly look there. And maybe what I can do is I could reach out with LC over at Can-Do and see if I can't send you some more resources to look into.
That would be so great. I have added you on LinkedIn and on Instagram, so I do look to connect. I appreciate this so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Happy to help.
I have a question.
All right, thanks so much. Okay, so we have two minutes left, Punita, and then Patricia came on camera. So if you make it a quick question, come on.
Yes, I am looking to work with Indigenous people. And what is the best way that I can approach and work with them?
Oh, that's such a big question to answer here, because I'm not sure what kind of work you're trying to do.
I have a startup company of oil and natural gas, and I would love to partner with them and work with them. And it's very hard for me to get hold of anyone. Like I just emailed a couple of times, but I don't get any reply. So you were talking about the barriers. So how can non-Indigenous person can break the barrier so that they can come close to their heart? Because some non-Indigenous people are very nice too. So what would you suggest for them?
Okay, so maybe I'll try and follow up with you separately as well, but I would also start looking at like CCAB, for example, might be also another way to look at working with oil and gas, because I know a lot of their membership is the energy sector. So that's
I did, but it's hard to connect with the right person. That's the thing. I'm a member of Can-Do and CCAB both. Yeah. And
which region are you in, Punita?
I'm in New Brunswick.
Okay. And so I apologize, Shannon, I don't mean to cut you off. And so if you're trying to connect, so you're looking at connecting with First Nations and or Métis regions?
Yeah, that's right. It means it doesn't matter to me because I really like working with them, and the background that I have is similar to the First Nations. So to me, it seems like I'm working with the family, not working as a as an entrepreneur or something like that. To me, it seems I have a family, so why not I connect with the family and work, not only just work as a work, but work as a family, like you said, supporting each other, coming and looking at the well-being of each other, and doing things for each other. Not
so I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to be cognizant, Michelle, we're going over time, and so I would suggest in terms of New Brunswick, your YWCAs, your YMCAs, a lot of times your newcomer community, they'll have events where they'll do newcomers, and I apologize, I'm not assuming that you're a newcomer, but they will host community events where First Nations and newcomers or other people of color can come together, multicultural councils, just from a community perspective.
okay.
Sometimes through your government, your provincial government, there may be Indigenous economic development corporations, or so they would have specialists that would work specifically with the First Nations when it comes to partnership opportunities. So depending on what it is that you're trying to, connect with First Nations about.
Okay.
You've got some really good, Native Women's Association of Canada would have a local Aboriginal group of women that are in your territory. Again, there's lots of different, depending on what your intentions are, there's lots of good community resources that are out there. I would suggest maybe Googling NWAC and some of their provincial territorial associations, and seeing who your local, out here in Saskatchewan, it's, the Women of the Swift Flowing River, but there are provincial Indigenous groups.
Could you please send me the link? I'll really appreciate that.
NWAC is just www.nwac.ca. Anyway, Shannon, I missed your question, but I apologize. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I always love listening to you, and you're such a motivator. And, I'm going to quote you maybe on my Wednesday webinar next week. So just an FYI.
And thank you. I know we follow each other on social too, and I'm so impressed by the work that you're doing and what a leader you are in our space. So thank you for all that you're doing as well, Mercy, and to Michelle and everyone who stayed with us on the call. Michelle, I'll let you close us out just as beautifully as you brought us in.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for Shannon. Again, you shared your story, you shared your wisdom, you shared some really good, powerful words, and shared that advice and knowledge. So we just extend so much gratitude again for who you are and the presence that you are and the perspective that you bring to the table. There's so much, this conversation could have gone on and on. So we thank you everybody for your conversation, your questions that you brought to the table. There's still so much work to be done. But we have that capacity within us. We have that vision, we have that strength, we have that push from our ancestors, and we have Creator. So there's always hope. Again, no matter where you look, you're going to see the Indigenous women rise and follow their dream, their vision, and whatever Creator put in their heart. And Shannon, you are just a testament to that. So we thank you, we honor you. And so continue to walk in a good way, everyone. It is Wednesday. I hope you have a good rest of the day and hope to see you again. So be well and peace. Peace out. Take care.
Peace out, Michelle. Thank you so much. Mercy.